Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I wanted to go over the basic gist of how the battle system works in Temtem and sort of answer and dispel some questions that I figured most people would have regarding to the way battles work in contrast to Pokemon. If you're someone who plays Pokemon, you might come to expect certain things at a default and not actually realize that things work differently in Temtem. For example, status conditions will still hurt your Temtem when they're benched as opposed to Pokemon where they do not. Anyways, as I said, this video aims to dispel any uncertainty about certain aspects of the game's battle system. I'm going to structure this video in such a way that assumes that the viewer has at least a surface level knowledge of how battling works, or at least has played a Pokemon game at a general level. You don't have to be 1800 ELO on Pokemon Showdown, but you do need to understand basic principles of battling so that the comparisons make sense. I'm going to break this video up into several different parts, exploring the various aspects of what makes up your Temtem and how certain situations will play out. So without further ado, let's get into it. Temtem battles are pretty much all doubles, and the entire meta is set up around that fact. It'll be really important to keep mindful of which Temtem you use in tandem. You can have a total of 6 Temtem on your person at any given time. Every Temtem can have 1 or 2 of 12 types. The current type list is as follows: Neutral, Electric, Digital, Crystal, Mental, Melee, Earth, Wind, Fire, Nature, Water, and Toxic. Every type has corresponding weaknesses and strengths. Some types will hit others for double damage, while others will hit for half. Here's a type chart for reference, but most people playing Temtem already have an idea of how the concept of types work. One thing of note is that Temtem that are dual typed will take both types into consideration when being attacked. So if you have a Barnshe, which is Mental and Wind, and get hit by an Electric type attack, that'll be super effective against Mental and Wind, making it do 4 times damage instead of double. If you were to use an electric attack on Genki, an electric flying type, it would do neutral or ×1 damage, because although wind is weak to electric, electric takes half damage from itself. So the ×2 and the ×0.5 average out to ×1. Pretty simple. Okay, so this is also pretty straightforward and we won't spend a whole lot of time going into the nitty gritty, but basically every Temtem has varying base stats. That's what truly makes each Temtem unique. Some Tems might have a high special attack stat and be suited for sweeping, while others might be suited for stalling. Seeing a Temtem's base stats will help you determine what you want to do with it. See a Temtem with high speed and high attack? Well, you're going to want to use it as a sweeper. For more competitive players, you're going to want to compare base stats across the board alongside movesets and whatnot, but for this general video, all we need to know is that base stats are essentially the composition of your Temtem. These base stats are broken up into 7 categories, being HP, stamina, speed, attack, defense, special attack, and special defense. Your HP is your health pool, and when it reaches 0, you're knocked out. Pretty simple. Your attack and special attack refer to your output when executing particular attacks. Physical attacks use the attack stat, while special attacks use a special attack stat. We'll be going more in depth as to how the attacks, or as they're referred to in Temtem, techniques work shortly. But for now, just know that generally most Tems only use one of these stats when battling, unless it's built as a mixed attacker. Defense and special defense refer to the tankiness of your Temtem. Low defense means you'll take more damage from physical techniques, whereas low special defense means you'll take more damage from special techniques. Speed determines who will attack first. The Temtem with the higher speed stat goes first, but unlike Pokemon, there's more to it than just that due to Temtem's priority system, which we will get into shortly. Stamina is a value that is depleted upon using attacks, and different attacks have different stamina values. This replaces the PP system from Pokemon. Once again, this will get its own section shortly, but yeah, that's the basic overview on Temtem base stats. Nothing too complex here. Techniques are moves that are executed upon command. Each Temtem can have 4 techniques in total at any given time, and they're all categorized into one of 3 sections: physical, special, and status. Physical techniques do damage based off the user's attack stat, special techniques do damage based off the user's special attack stat, and status techniques have generally non-damaging effects to either the user or the opponent. For an example to each, Kick is a physical technique, DC Beam is a special technique, and Toxic Spores is a status technique. Remember these 3 icons associated with each, as that will be very important to keep in mind, as most Temtem have a much higher attack than special attack, or vice versa. Some attacks you'll notice also have a little icon in the top left corner. These indicate synergy techniques, which can have bonus effects and higher damage output depending on the technique itself. To pull off a synergy attack, you'll have to have an ally with the specifically outlined type by your side. These attacks can work with switch-ins, so you can bait your opponents in and then decimate them. For example, if I want to use synergy with Eureshiel, I can set up by switching into an allied toxic type and then getting the synergy effect in the same turn. What's important here is to make sure that when you're using that attack, your ally is the correct typing and that they're still on the field. If it's switched away or gets knocked out, your synergy effect won't deploy. Another important aspect of your techniques are their priority values. Each technique will have a certain amount of arrows beside it. As you can imagine, each arrow indicates how much priority the attack has, but it's not like Pokemon where, for example, quick attack is 1 priority and fake out is like 5 priority or whatever. The priority actually multiplies onto your Tem's speed. In Pokemon, a Pokemon with a speed stat of 10 using quick attack will go before a level 100 Greninja with max speed if it's not also using an attack with +1 priority or higher. In Temtem, the priority values actually multiply your speed stat, so that wouldn't make it faster. Anyways, the values are as follows. 2 arrows is your default speed. If your Temtem has, let's just say, a 200 speed stat, this will attack using that 200 speed stat. 1 arrow is actually low priority and will use 50% of your speed stat, so for example, a Temtem with 200 speed will use 100 speed in this case, making it potentially vulnerable to otherwise slower Temtem. 3 arrows represents the attack moving at 150% the user's regular speed. If a Temtem with 200 speed uses this attack, it will go off at a value of 300. And 3 arrows with a plus sign represents 175% speed, or 1.75 times. A Temtem with a speed stat of 200 in this case would move at 350. Knowing exactly how fast your opponents are and the speed tiers of each move will be important in competitive play, as you might be fast enough to outspeed certain slower Tems even if you're using a lower priority attack. Before we move on, another noteworthy aspect of techniques are holds. A hold value is something that prevents you from using an attack over and over again. Some attacks have no hold, which look like this, whilst other attacks might have 1 or more hold, which looks like this. If your Tem's attack has 2 bars, then it's called having 1 hold. Hold basically means that you'll have to hold for a certain amount of turns before you can use it. For example, Tail Strike can't be used the first turn you send out Scale, but on turn 2 it's available. Since it has 2 bars, it'll be available every other turn or every second turn. Attacks with 3 or more bars work similarly, with them working on every 3rd or 4th turn respectively. Traits are inherent abilities that your Temtem will have access to just by existing. A simple yet effective way to explain a trait is to give an example. Let's look at Nesla. It has a trait called Electric Synthesize. And what this trait does is make it so that electric type attacks do not damage it and instead heal it. So without this trait, Nesla should take regular ×1 damage from electric type attacks, but since this trait is in effect, it does not. Traits do not take up a move slot and instead are displayed upon activated in battle. These are completely passive, and understanding your Temtem's trait can be the key to victory. Temtem are able to hold items called gear. Gear essentially acts as an extra effect or buff that any Temtem meeting the requirements of said gear can activate. You can choose which gear to give which Temtem in the bag and read their descriptions there. An example of a gear item is this one called Chamomile, which activates upon entering the battlefield. It causes all stat changes to be removed. Think of gear as like a second ability for your Temtem that you can swap out and around to see which Temtem fits which gear the best for your team. Some gear will reduce damage taken from certain types, some gear will increase output damage, etc. Having the right gear in the right situation can tip the battle in your favor. SVs stand for single values, and for those of you who are veteran Pokemon fans, you can compare them to IVs as they're basically the same thing. The only difference here is that each Tem has 7 stats opposed to 6 in Pokemon, and the SVs range from 1 to 50 instead of 0 to 31 like in Pokemon. Think of it as like the genetics of your Temtem. Some Temtem are genetically superior to others, and the ones with higher SVs are the ones to keep. TVs stand for training values, and these are different from SVs in that Temtems all start with 0 when you catch them, and you can increase them. Any Tem can have a total of 1,000 TVs, but no more than 500 in any stat. The way to earn TVs is to defeat certain Temtem in battle, and each Temtem gives a different yield. I'll leave a link in the description to which Temtems will give you which TVs for which stat. It's basically just Temtem's version of EVs from Pokemon. TVs and SVs aren't super important for those just looking to play through the story, but for competitive battles, they can be the difference between getting knocked out or surviving or going first or second. In the future, we'll do a more in-depth guide surrounding TVs and whatnot, but for now, this is what we got. We touched on stamina earlier, but stamina is quite noteworthy as you're going to spend a majority of your time working around it. I didn't mention stamina when going over techniques, so we can cover it on its own, but essentially each technique has a stamina usage value. In general, stronger attacks will use more stamina while weaker attacks will use less. Status techniques also use stamina, and once again, the generally better ones use more than the generally worse ones. If you use an attack that would otherwise deplete all of your stamina, your Temtem will take damage equal to double that of the remaining needed stamina. In simpler terms, if I only have 5 stamina left and want to use a 10 stamina move, the attack will still work, but I will take 10 damage for that 5 extra stamina that I didn't have. This is referred to as overexertion damage. After a Temtem has overexerted itself, it cannot attack the following turn. It can, however, be swapped out to avoid having to sit and rest, leaving itself vulnerable. While we're on the topic of resting, at the end of every turn, your Temtem will recover a small amount of stamina passively, and if you decide to press the clock sprite next to the techniques, it will skip the turn and recover a somewhat larger amount of stamina. Stat buffs are basically what happens when your stat goes up, and debuffs are the versa to that. I'm going to let fellow TemTuber GamePiece explain.
When you are raising a stat, there are 5 levels of stages that can be raised or lowered by, and I'm going to go into the different values for each of these. Now, if you are raising a stat, each stage that it gets raised by is going to be raised by 50%, going all the way up to 250%. And if you go over to the lowered side of things, a stat that is lowered from beginning from one stage will decrease to lowered by 67%, lowered by 50, 40, 33, and then 28% at 5 stages of lowered stats. The stat buffs and debuffs persist throughout the entire fight. So if you have a Temtem that comes in at the beginning and you get a few boosts off on it, and then a threat comes in on the enemy side of the field to try to take that buff Temtem out, you can swap it out for a counter to that threat and then keep that Temtem boosted in the back.
So yes, unlike Pokemon where switching out causes all stats to reset, in Temtem the stats carry over even when your Temtem is benched. This is going to open up the floodgates to tons of different setup combos that wouldn't be able to exist in Pokemon. Also, I'm going to leave a link in the description of the GamePiece's channel. He does do very useful Temtem content like competitive analyses and whatnot, so make sure to check him out and tell him I sent you. So yeah, these are the basic principles of battle, and I hope that I managed to dispel any confusion regarding the system itself. For those coming over from Pokemon, which I'm assuming that's most of you, you'll notice some very notable differences, especially the way stat changes and priority works. The overall battle system is only going to get more sophisticated as more Temtem techniques, traits, etc. are added, and I hope I did a decent job educating everyone on the basics. Hope you all enjoyed, and make sure to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at GymLeaderEd, and until next time, peace.